But let us continue with the 5th book of 14 of the Wizard of Oz series. And this one is called The Road to Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 1. The Way to Butterfield.
"Please, miss," said the Shaggy Man, "can you tell me the road to Butterfield?"
Dorothy looked him over. Yes, he was Shaggy, all right, but there was a twinkle in his eye that seemed pleasant. "Oh yes," she replied, "I can tell you, but it isn't this road at all."
"No?"
"You cross the 10-acre lot, follow the lane to the highway, go north to the 5 branches, and take, let me see."
"To be sure, miss. See as far as Butterfield, if you like," said the Shaggy Man.
"You take the branch next the willow stump, I believe, or else the branch by the gopher holes, or else—"
"Won't any of 'em do, miss?"
"Course not, Shaggy Man. You must take the right road to get to the Butterfield."
"And is that the one by the gopher stump, or—"
"Dear me," cried Dorothy. "I shall have to show you the way, you're so stupid. Wait a minute till I run in the house and get my sunbonnet." Jeez, Dorothy. Just call random strangers stupid. Come on now. The Shaggy Man waited. He had an oat straw in his mouth, which he chewed slowly as if it tasted good, but it didn't. There was an apple tree beside the house, and some apples had fallen to the ground. The Shaggy Man thought they would taste better than the oat straw, so he walked over to get some. A little black dog with bright brown eyes dashed out of the farmhouse and ran madly toward the Shaggy Man, who had already picked up 3 apples and put them in one of the big wide pockets of his shaggy coat. The little dog barked and made a dive for the Shaggy Man's leg, but he grabbed the dog by the neck and put it in his big pocket along with the apples. He took more apples afterward, for many were on the ground, and each one that he tossed in his pocket hit the little dog somewhere upon the head or the back, and it made him growl. The little dog's name was Toto, and he was sorry he had been put in the Shaggy Man's pocket. Pretty soon Dorothy came out of the house with her sunbonnet, and she called out, "Come on, Shaggy Man, if you want me to show you the road to Butterfield." She climbed the fence into the 10-acre lot, and he followed her, walking slowly and stumbling over the little hillocks in the pasture, as if he was thinking of something else and did not notice them. "My, but you're clumsy," said the little girl. Are your feet tired?"
"No, miss, it's my whiskers. They tire very easily in this warm weather," said he. "I wish it would snow, you know."
"Course not, Shaggy Man," replied Dorothy, giving him a severe look. "If it snowed in August, it would spoil the corn and the oats and the wheat, and then Uncle Henry wouldn't have any crops, and that would make him poor, and—"
"Never mind," said the Shaggy Man. "It won't snow, I guess. Is this the lane?"
"Yes," replied Dorothy, climbing another fence. "I'll go as far as the highway with you."
"Thank you, miss. You're very kind for your size, I'm sure," said he gratefully.
"It isn't everyone who knows the road to Butterfield," Dorothy remarked as she tripped along the lane. "But I've driven there many a time with Uncle Henry, and so I believe I could find it blindfolded."
"Don't do that, miss," said the Shaggy Man earnestly. "You might make a mistake."
"I won't," she answered, laughing. "Here's the highway. Now it's the third turn to the left, or else it's the 4th. Let's see. The first one is by the elm tree, and the second one is by the gopher holes, and then—"
"Then what?" he inquired,
putting his hands in his coat pockets. Toto grabbed a finger and bit it. The Shaggy Man took his hand out of that pocket quickly and said, "Oh, Dorothy didn't notice. She was shading her eyes from the sun with her arm, looking anxiously down the road. "Come on," she commanded. "It's only a little farther, so I may as well show you." After a while, they came to the place where 5 roads branched in different directions. Dorothy pointed to one and said, "That's it, Shaggy Man." "I'm much obliged, miss," he said, and started along another road. "Not that one," she cried. "You're going wrong." He stopped. I thought you said that other was the road to Butterfield," said he, running his finger through his shaggy whiskers in a puzzled way. "So it is." "But I don't want to go to Butterfield, miss." "You don't?" "Of course not. I wanted you to show me the road so I shouldn't go there by mistake." "Oh. Where do you want to go then?" "I'm not particular, miss." This answer astonished the little girl, and it made her provoked too, to think she had taken all this trouble for nothing. There are good many roads here," observed the Shaggy Man, turning slowly around like a human windmill. "Seems to me a person could go most anywhere from this place." Dorothy turned around too, and gazed in surprise. There were a good many roads, more than she had ever seen before. She tried to count them, knowing there ought to be 5, but when she had counted 17, she grew bewildered and stopped, for the roads were as many as the spokes of a wheel, and ran in every direction from the place where they stood. So if she kept counting on, she was likely to count some of the roads twice. "Dear me," she exclaimed. "There used to be only 5 roads, highway and all. And now, why, where's the highway, Shaggy Man?" "Can't say, miss," he responded, sitting down upon the ground as if tired with standing. "Wasn't it here a minute ago?" "I thought so," she answered, greatly perplexed. "And I saw the gopher holes too, and the dead stump. But they're not here now. These roads are all strange. And what a lot of them there are. Where do you suppose they all go to?" "Roads," observed the Shaggy Man, "don't go anywhere. They stay in one place so folks can walk on them." Duh, Dorothy. Didn't you know that? Roads don't go anywhere. He put his hand in his side pocket and drew out an apple, quick, before Toto could bite him again. The little dog got his head out this time and said, "Bow wow," so loudly that it made Dorothy jump. "Oh, Toto," she cried, "where did you come from?" "I brought him along," said the Shaggy Man. "What for?" she asked. "To guard these apples in my pocket, miss, so no one would steal them." With one hand, the Shaggy Man held the apple, which he began eating, while with the other hand he pulled Toto out of his pocket and dropped him to the ground. Of course, Toto made for Dorothy at once, barking joyfully at his release from the dark pocket. Oops. When the child had patted his head lovingly, he sat down before her, his red tongue hanging out to one side of his mouth, and looked up into her face with his bright brown eyes, as if asking her what they should do next. Dorothy didn't know. She looked around her anxiously for some familiar landmarks, but everything was strange. Between the branches of the many roads were green meadows and a few shrubs and trees, but she couldn't see anywhere the farmhouse from which she had just come, or anything she had ever seen before, except the Shaggy Man and Toto. Besides this, she had turned around and around so many times trying to figure out where she was, that now she couldn't even tell which direction the farmhouse ought to be in. And this began to worry her and make her feel anxious. "I'm afraid, Shaggy Man," she said with a sigh, "that we're lost." "That's nothing to be afraid of," he replied, throwing away the core of his apple and beginning to eat another one. "Each of these roads must lead somewhere, or it wouldn't be here. So what does it matter?" "I want to go home again," she said. "Well, why don't you?" said he. "I don't know which road to take." "That is too bad," he said, shaking his shaggy head gravely. "I wish I could help you, but I can't. I'm a stranger in these parts." "Seems as if I were too," she said, sitting down beside him. "It's funny. A few minutes ago I was home, and I just came to show you the way to Butterfield.
So I shouldn't make a mistake to go there.
And now I'm lost myself and don't know how to get home.
Have an apple,
Suggested the Shaggy Man, handing her one with pretty red cheeks. I'm not hungry, said Dorothy, pushing it away.
But you may be tomorrow, and then you'll be sorry you didn't eat the apple, said he.
If I am, I'll eat the apple then, promised Dorothy.
Perhaps there won't be any apple then,
he returned, beginning to eat the red-cheeked one himself.
Dogs sometimes can find their way home better than people, he went on. Perhaps your dog can lead you back to the farm.
Will you, Toto? Asked Dorothy. Toto wagged his tail vigorously. All right, said the little girl. Let's go home. Toto looked around a minute and dashed up one of the roads. Goodbye, Shaggy Man, called Dorothy, and ran after Toto. The little dog pranced briskly along for some distance, when he turned around and looked at his mistress questioningly. Oh, don't expect me to tell you anything. I don't know the way, she said. You'll have to find out yourself. But Toto couldn't. He wagged his tail and sneezed and shook his ears and trotted back to where they had left the Shaggy Man. From here, he started along another road, and then came back and tried another. But each time he found the way strange and decided it would not take them to the farmhouse. Finally, when Dorothy had begun to wire with chasing after him, Toto sat down panting beside the Shaggy Man and gave up. Dorothy sat down too, very thoughtful. The little girl had encountered some queer adventures since she came to live at the farm, but this was the queerest of them all. To get lost in 15 minutes so near to her home and in an unromantic state of Kansas was an experience that fairly bewildered her.
Will your folks worry?
Asked the Shaggy Man, his eyes twinkling in a pleasant way. I suppose so, answered Dorothy with a sigh. Uncle Henry says there's always something happening to me, but I've always come home safe at last, so perhaps he'll take comfort and think I'll come home safe this time.
I'm sure you will, said the Shaggy Man, smiling and smilingly nodding at her. Good little girls never come to any harm, you know. For my part, I'm good too, so nothing ever hurts me.
Dorothy looked at him curiously. His clothes were shaggy, his boots were shaggy, and full of holes, and his hair and whiskers were shaggy, but his smile was sweet and his eyes were kind. Why didn't you want to go to Butterfield? She asked.
Because a man who lives there who owes me 15 cents. And if I went to Butterfield and he saw me, he'd want to pay me the money. I don't want the money, dear.
Why not? She inquired.
Money, declared the Shaggy Man, makes people proud and haughty. I don't want to be proud and haughty. All I want is to have people love me, and as long as I own the love magnet, everyone I meet is sure to love me dearly.
The love magnet? Why, what's that?
I'll show you, if you won't tell anyone, he answered in a low, mysterious voice.
There isn't anyone to tell except Toto, said the girl. The Shaggy Man searched in one pocket carefully, and in another pocket, and in a third. At last he drew out a small parcel wrapped in crumpled paper and tied with a cotton string. He unwound the string and opened the parcel, and took out a bit of metal shaped like a horseshoe. It was dull and brown, and not very pretty.
This, my dear, he said impressively, is the wonderful love magnet. It was given to me by an Eskimo in the Sandwich Isles.
That's not a good name anymore. But I guess that's the product of the time.
In the Sandwich Islands, where there are no sandwiches at all. And as long as I carry it, every living thing I met will love me dearly.
Inuit, Mr. Baum, Inuit. They're not the other word. Why didn't the Inuit keep it? She asked, looking at the magnet with interest.
He got tired of being loved and longed for someone to hate him. So he gave me the magnet, and the very next day a grizzly bear ate him.
Wasn't he sorry then? She inquired.
He didn't say, replied the Shaggy Man,
Wrapping and tying the love magnet with great care and putting it away in another pocket.
but the bear didn't seem sorry a bit, he added.
Did you know the bear? Asked Dorothy.
Yes, we used to play ball together in the Caviar Islands. The bear loved me because I had the love magnet. I couldn't blame him for eating the Inuit, because it was his nature to do so.
Once, said Dorothy, I knew a hungry tiger who longed to eat fat babies, because it was his nature to do so. But he never ate any because he had a conscience.
This bear, replied the Shaggy Man with a sigh, had no conscience, you see.
The Shaggy Man sat silent for several minutes, apparently considering the cases of the bear and the tiger, while Toto watched him with an air of great interest. The little dog was doubtless thinking of his ride in the Shaggy Man's pocket, and planning to keep out of reach from the future. At last the Shaggy Man turned and inquired,
What's your name, little girl?
My name's Dorothy, said she, jumping up again. But what are we going to do? We can't stay here forever, you know.
Let's take the 7th road, he suggested. 7 is a lucky number for little girls named Dorothy.
The 7th from where?
From where you begin to count.
So she counted 7 roads, and the 7th looked just like all the others. But the Shaggy Man got up from the ground, where he had been sitting, and started down this road as if sure it was the best way to go, and Dorothy and Toto followed him. Chapter 2. Dorothy Meets Button-Bright. The 7th road was a good road, and curved it this way and that, winding through green meadows and fields covered with daisies and buttercups, and past groups of shady trees. There were no houses of any sort to be seen, and for some distance they met with no living creatures at all. Dorothy began to fear they were getting a good way from the farmhouse, since here everything was strange to her. But it would do no good at all to go back to where the other roads had all met, because the next one they chose might lead her just as far from home. She kept on beside the Shaggy Man, who whistled cheerful tunes and beguile the journey, until by and by they followed a turn in the road and saw before them a big chestnut tree making a shady spot over the highway. In the shade sat a little boy dressed in sailor clothes, who was digging a hole in the earth with a bit of wood. He must have been digging some time, because the hole was already big enough to drop a football into. Dorothy and Toto and the Shaggy Man came to a halt before the little boy, who kept on digging, in a sober and persistent fashion. "Who are you?" asked the girl. He looked up at her calmly. His face was round and chubby, and his eyes were big, blue, and earnest. "I'm Button-Bright," he said. "What's your real name?" she inquired. "Button-Bright." "This isn't a really truly name?" she exclaimed. "Isn't it?" he asked, still digging. "Of course not. It's just a thing to call you by. You must have a name." "Must I?" "To be sure. What does your mama call you?" He paused in his digging and tried to think. "Papa always said I was bright as a button, so Mama called me Button-Bright," he said. "What's your papa's name?" "Just Papa." "What else?" "Don't know." "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man, smiling. "We'll call the boy Button-Bright, as his mama does. That name is good as any, and better than some." Dorothy watched the boy dig. "Where do you live?" she asked. "Don't know," was the reply. "How did you come here?" "Don't know," he said again. "Don't you know where you came from?" "No," he said. "Why, he must be lost," she said to the Shaggy Man. She turned to the boy once more. "What are you going to do?" she inquired. "Dig," said he. "But you can't dig forever, and what are you going to do then?" she persisted. "Don't know," said the boy. But you must know something, declared Dorothy, getting provoked. Must I? He asked, looking up in surprise. Of course you must. What must I know? What's going to become of you, for one thing, she answered. Do you know what's going to become of me? He asked. Not exactly, she admitted. Do you know what's going to become of you? He continued earnestly. I can't say I do, replied Dorothy, remembering her present difficulties. The Shaggy Man laughed. No one knows everything, Dorothy, he said. But Button-Bright doesn't seem to know anything, she declared. Do you, Button-Bright? He shook his head, which had pretty curls all over it, and replied with perfect calmness, Don't know. Never before had Dorothy met with anyone who could give her so little information. The boy was evidently lost, and his people would be sure to worry about him. He seemed 2 or 3 years younger than Dorothy, and was prettily dressed, as if someone loved him dearly and took much pains to make him look well. How then did he come to be in this lonely road? She wondered. Near Button-Bright, on the ground, lay a sailor hat with a gilt anchor on the band. His sailor trousers were long and wide at the bottom, and the broad collar of his blouse and gold anchors sewed on its corners. The boy was still digging at his hole. Have you ever been to the sea? Asked Dorothy. To see what? Answered Button-Bright. I mean, have you ever been where there's water? Yes, said Button-Bright. There's a well in our backyard. You don't understand, cried Dorothy. I mean, have you ever been on a big ship floating on a big ocean? Don't know, he said. Then why do you wear sailor's clothes? Don't know, he answered again. Dorothy was in despair. Zetsubo. You're just awful stupid, Button-Bright, she said. Am I? He asked. Yes, you are. Why? Looking up at her with big eyes. She was going to say don't know, but stopped herself in time. That's for your answer. That's for you to answer, she replied. It's no use asking Button-Bright questions, said the Shaggy Man, who had been eating another apple. But someone ought to take care of the poor little chap, don't you think? So he'd better come along with us. Toto had been looking with great curiosity in the hole which the boy was digging, and growing more and more excited every minute, perhaps thinking that Button-Bright was after some wild animal. The little dog began barking loudly and jumped into the hole himself, where he began to dig with his tiny paws, making the earth fly in all directions. It spattered all over the boy. Dorothy seized him and raised him to his feet, brushing his clothes with her hand. Stop that, Toto, she called. There aren't any mice or woodchucks in that hole, so don't be foolish. Toto stopped, sniffed at the hole suspiciously, and jumped out of it, wagging his tail as if he had done something important. Well, said the Shaggy Man, let's start on. We won't get anywhere before night comes. Where do you expect to go? Asked Dorothy. I'm like Button-Bright. I don't know, answered the Shaggy Man with a laugh. But I've learned from long experience that every road leads somewhere, or there wouldn't be any road. So it's likely that if we travel long enough, my dear, we will come to some place or another in the end of the road. And so it's likely that if we travel long enough, my dear, we will come to some place or another in the end. What place it will be, we can't even guess at this moment, but we're sure to find out when we get there. Why, yes, said Dorothy. That seems reasonable, Shaggy Man. Chapter 3. A Queer Village. Button-Bright took the Shaggy Man's hand willingly, for the Shaggy Man had the love magnet, you know, which is the reason Button-Bright had loved him at once. They started on with Dorothy on one side and Toto on the other, the little party trudging along more cheerfully than you might have supposed. The girl was getting used to queer adventures, which interested her very much. Wherever Dorothy went, Toto was sure to go, like Mary's little lamb. Button-Bright didn't seem a bit afraid or worried because he was lost, and the Shaggy Man had no home, perhaps, and was as happy in one place as in another. Before long, they saw ahead of them a fine big arch spanning the road, and when they came nearer they found that the arch was beautifully carved and decorated with rich colors. A row of peacocks with spread tails ran along the top of it, and all the feathers were gorgeously painted. In the center was a large fox's head, and the fox wore a shrewd and knowing expression, and had large spectacles over its eyes, and a small golden crown with shiny points on the top of its head. While travelers were looking around with curiosity at this beautiful arch, there suddenly marched out a company of soldiers. Only the soldiers were all foxes dressed in uniforms. They wore green jackets and yellow pantaloons, and their little round caps and their high boots were a bright red color. Also, there was a big red bow tied to the middle of each long bushy tail. Each soldier was armed with a wooden sword, having an edge of sharp teeth set in a row, and the sight of these teeth at first caused Dorothy to shudder. A captain marched in the front of the company of fox soldiers, his uniform embroidered with gold braid to make it handsomer than the others. Almost before our friends realized it, the soldiers had surrounded them on all sides, and the captain was calling out in a harsh voice, "Surrender! You are our prisoners." "What's a prisoner?" asked Button-Bright. "A prisoner is a captive," replied the fox captain, strutting up and down with much dignity. "What's a captive?" asked Button-Bright. "You're one," said the captain. That made the Shaggy Man laugh. "Good afternoon, Captain," he said, bowing politely to all the foxes and very low to their commander. "I trust you are in good health and that your families are well?" The fox captain looked at the Shaggy Man, and his sharp features grew pleasant and smiling. "We're pretty well, thank you, Shaggy Man," said he, and Dorothy knew that the love magnet was working and that all the foxes now loved the Shaggy Man because of it. But Toto didn't know this, for he began barking angrily and tried to bite the captain's hairy leg, where it showed between his red boots and yellow pantaloons. "Stop, Toto!" cried the little girl, seizing her dog in her arms. "These are our friends." "Why, so are we. Why, so we are," remarked the captain in tones of astonishment. "I thought at first we were enemies, but it seems you are friends instead. You must come with me to see King Dox." "Who's he?" asked Button-Bright with earnest eyes. "King Dox of Foxville, the great and wise sovereign who rules over our community." "What's a sovereign and a kunity?" inquired Button-Bright. "Don't ask so many questions, little boy." "Why?" "Ah, why indeed," exclaimed the captain, looking at Button-Bright admiringly. "If you don't ask questions, you will learn nothing. True enough, I was wrong. You're very clever, little boy, come to think of it. Very clever indeed. But now, friends, please come with me, for it is my duty to escort you at once to the royal palace." The soldiers marched back through the arch again, and with them marched the Shaggy Man, Dorothy, Toto, and Button-Bright. Once through the opening, they found a fine, big city spread out before them, and all the houses of carved marble in beautiful colors. The decorations were mostly birds and other fowl, such as peacocks, peasants, turkeys, prairie chickens, ducks, and geese. Over each doorway was a carved head representing the fox who lived in that house, this effect being quite pretty and unusual. As our friends marched along, some of the great foxes came out on the porches and balconies to get a view of the strangers. These foxes were all handsomely dressed, the girl foxes and women foxes wearing gowns of feathers woven together efficiently and colored in bright hues, which Dorothy thought were quite artistic and decidedly attractive. Button-Bright stared until his eyes were big and round, and he would have stumbled and fallen more than once had not the Shaggy Man grasped his hand tightly. They were all interested, and Toto was so excited he wanted to bark every minute and to chase and fight every fox he caught sight of. But Dorothy held his little wiggling body fast in her arms and commanded him to be good and behave himself. So he finally quieted down, like a wise doggy, deciding there were too many foxes in Foxville to fight one at a time. To fight at one time. By and by, they came to a big square, and in the center of the square stood the royal palace. Dorothy knew it at once, because it had over its great door the carved head of a fox just like the one she had seen on the arch, and this fox was the only one who wore a golden crown. There were many fox soldiers guarding the door, but they bowed to the captain and admitted him without question. The captain led them through many rooms, where richly dressed foxes were sitting on beautiful chairs or sipping tea, which was being passed around by fox servants in white aprons. They came to a big doorway covered with heavy curtains of cloth of gold. Beside this doorway stood a huge drum. The fox captain went to this drum and knocked his knees against it. First one knee, then the other, so the drum said boom, boom. "You must all do exactly what I do," ordered the captain. So the Shaggy Man pounded the drum with his knees, and so did Dorothy, and so did Button-Bright. The boy wanted to keep on pounding it with his little fat knees, because he liked the sound of it, but the captain stopped him. Toto couldn't pound the drum with his knees, and he didn't know enough to wag his tail against it, so Dorothy pounded the drum for him, and that made him bark. And when the little dog barked, the fox captain scowled. The golden curtains drew back far enough to make an opening, through which marched the captain with the others. The broad, long room they entered was decorated in gold with stained glass windows of splendid colors. In the corner of the room, a richly carved gold throne sat the Fox King, surrounded by a group of other foxes, all of whom wore great spectacles over their eyes, making them look solemn and important. Dorothy knew the king at once, because she had seen his head carved on the arch and doorway, and over the doorway of the palace. Having met with several other kings in their travels, she knew what to do, and at once made a low bow before the throne. The Shaggy Man bowed too, and Button-Bright bobbed his head and said hello. "Most wise and noble potentate of Foxville," said the captain, addressing the king in a pompous voice, "I humbly beg to report that I found these strangers on the road leading to your foxy majesty's dominions, and they have therefore brought them up before you, as is my duty." So, said the king, looking at them keenly, "what brought you here, strangers?" "Our legs, may it please you, your royal hairiness," replied the Shaggy Man. "What is your business here?" was the next question. "To get away as soon as possible," said the Shaggy Man. The king didn't know about the magnet, of course, but it made him love the Shaggy Man at once. "Do just as you please about going away," he said, "but I'd like to show you the sights of my city, and to entertain your party while you are here. We feel highly honored to have little Dorothy with us, I assure you, and we appreciate her kindness in making us a visit, for whatever country Dorothy visits is sure to become famous." The speech greatly surprised the little girl, who asked, "How did your majesty know my name?" "Why, everybody knows you, my dear," said the Fox King. "Don't you realize that? You are quite an important personage since Princess Ozma of Oz made you her friend." "Do you know Ozma?" she asked, wondering. "I regret to say that I do not," he answered sadly, "but I hope to meet her soon. You know the Princess Ozma is to celebrate her birthday on the 21st of this month." "Is she?" said Dorothy. "I didn't know that." "Yes, it is the most brilliant royal ceremony ever held in a city in Fairyland, and I hope you will try to get me an invitation." Dorothy thought a moment. "I'm sure Ozma would invite you if I asked her," she said. "But how could you get to the Land of Oz and the Emerald City? It's a good way from Kansas." "Kansas?" he exclaimed, surprised.
Why, yes, we are in Kansas now, aren't we? She returned. What a queer notion, cried the Fox King, beginning to laugh. Whatever made you think this is Kansas? I left my Uncle Henry's farm only about 2 hours ago. That's the reason, she said, rather perplexed. But tell me, dear, did you ever see so wonderful a city as Foxville in Kansas? He questioned. No, Your Majesty. And haven't you traveled from Oz to Kansas in less than half a jiffy, by means of the silver shoes and the magic belt? Yes, Your Majesty, she acknowledged. Then why do you wonder that an hour or two could bring you to Foxville, which is nearer to Oz than it is to Kansas? Dear me, exclaimed Dorothy. Is this another fairy adventure? It seems to be, said the Fox King, smiling. Dorothy turned to the Shaggy Man, and her face was grave and reproachful. Are you a magician or a fairy in disguise? She asked. Did you enchant me when you asked me the way to Butterfield? The Shaggy Man shook his head. You ever heard of a shaggy fairy? He replied. No, Dorothy, my dear. I'm not to blame for this journey in any way, I assure you. There's been something strange about me ever since I owned the Love Magnet, but I don't know what it is any more than you do. I didn't try to get you away from home at all. If you want to find your way back to the farm, I'll go with you willingly and do my best to help you. Never mind, said the little girl thoughtfully. There isn't so much to see in Kansas as there is here. There isn't so much to see in Kansas as there is here. And I guess Aunt Em won't be very worried. That is, if I don't stay away too long. That's right, declared the Fox King, nodding approval. But be contented with your lot, whatever it happens to be, if you are wise. Which reminds me that you have a new companion on this adventure. He looks very clever and bright. He is, said Dorothy, and the Shaggy Man added, That's his name, Your Royal Highness. Your Royal Foxiness, Button Bright. Chapter 4. King Dox. It was amusing to note the expression on the face of King Dox as he looked the boy over, from his sailor hat to his stubby-toed shoes. And it was equally diverting to watch Button Bright stare at the king in return. No fox ever had beheld a fresher, fairer child's face, and no child had ever before heard a fox talk, or met with one who dressed so handsomely and ruled so big a city. I am sorry to say that no one had ever told the little boy much about fairies of any kind. This being the case, it is easy to understand how much this strange experience startled and astonished him. How do you like us? Asked the king. Dunno, said Button Bright. Of course you don't. It's too short of an acquaintance, returned His Majesty. What do you suppose my name is? Dunno, said Button Bright. How should you? Well, I'll tell you. My private name is Dox. But a king can't be called by his private name. He has to take one that is official. Therefore, my official name is King Renard IV. Renard with the accent on the Rin. Oh, thank you, Bushy. I appreciate the subscription. Oh, my break sign is still on. I realized that just as you said that. Whoopsie. My bad. Thanks for the catch, serious. But yes, thank you, Bushy, for subbing. I very much appreciate it. You guys are too kind. What's Rin? Asked Button Bright. How clever, exclaimed the king, turning a pleased face toward his counselors. The boy is indeed remarkably bright. What's Rin? He asks. And of course Rin is nothing at all by itself. Yes, he is very bright indeed. The question is what your majesty might call Foxy, said one of the counselors, an old gray fox. So it is, declared the king. Turning again to Button-Bright, he asked, having told you my name, what would you call me?
King Dox, said the boy.
Why?
'Cause Rin is nothing at all, was the reply.
Good, very good indeed. You certainly have a brilliant mind. Do you know why 2 and 2 make 4?
No, said Button-Bright. What is this conversation?
Clever, clever indeed. Of course you don't know. Nobody knows why. We only know it's so. And can't tell it's why it's so. Button-Bright, those curls and blue eyes do not go well with so much wisdom. They make you look too youthful and hide your real cleverness. Therefore I will do you a great favor. I will confer upon you the head of a fox, so that you may hereafter look as bright as you really are.
Oh, you didn't miss too much. I took my break and came back, and now we're having an interesting conversation between the King Dox and Button-Bright, who doesn't know anything, but apparently is very clever. And also, if you missed it, I did thank you for subbing to me. I very much appreciate it. I'm very happy that you are with me tonight, and that you're giving me your money. But thank you regardless. I hope that you are enjoying it. As he spoke, the king waved his paw toward the boy, and at once, the pretty curls and fresh round face and the big blue eyes were gone, while in their place a fox's head appeared upon Button-Bright's shoulders, a hairy head with a sharp nose and pointed ears and keen little eyes. "Oh, don't do that!" cried Dorothy, shrinking back from her transformed companion with a shocked and dismayed face.
"Too late, my dear, it's done. But you also shall have a fox's head if you can prove you're as clever as Button-Bright."
I don't want it. It's dreadful," she exclaimed. And hearing this verdict, Button-Bright began to boo-hoo just as if he were still a little boy.
"How can you tell? How can you call that lovely head dreadful?" asked the king. "It's a much prettier face than he had before, to my notion. And my wife says I'm a good judge of beauty. Don't cry, little fox boy. Laugh and be proud because you are so highly favored. How do you like the new head, Button-Bright?"
Don't, no, sobbed the child. Please change him back, your majesty, begged Dorothy.
King Reynard IV shook his head. "I can't do that," he said. "I haven't the power, even if I wanted to. No, Button-Bright must wear his fox head, and he'll be sure to love it dearly as soon as he gets used to it."
Both the Shaggy Man and Dorothy looked grave and anxious, for they were sorrowful that such a misfortune had overtaken their little companion. Toto barked at the fox boy once or twice, not realizing it was his former friend, who now wore an animal head. But Dorothy cuffed the dog and made him stop. As for the foxes, they all seemed to think that Button-Bright's new head was very becoming, and that their king had conferred a great honor on this little stranger. It was funny to see the boy reach up and feel his sharp nose and wide mouth, and wail afresh with grief. He wagged his ears in a comical manner, and tears were in his little black eyes. But Dorothy couldn't laugh at her friend just yet because she felt so sorry. Just then 3 little fox princesses, daughters of the king, entered the room, and when they saw Button-Bright, one exclaimed, "How lovely he is!" And the next one cried in delight, "How sweet he is!" And the third princess clapped her hands with pleasure and said, "How beautiful he is!" Yeah, Button-Bright's a furry now. Sorry. The king has turned him into a furry. This is the life in Foxville.
"Am I?
Oh, whoops, I skipped a line. Button Bright stopped crying and asked timidly, "Am I?" "In all the world..." Oh, the Fox Princess. "In all the world, there is not another a face so pretty," declared the biggest Fox Princess. "You must live with us always, and be our brother," said the next. "We shall all love you dearly," the third said. The praise did much to comfort the boy, and he looked around and tried to smile. It was a pitiful attempt, because the fox face was new and stiff, and Dorothy thought his expression more stupid than before the transformation. Jeez. Dorothy. "It is too late, Mother. I have seen too much." Yeah, that meme. "I think we ought to be going now," said the Shaggy Man uneasily, for he did not know what the king might take into his head to do next. "Don't leave us yet, I beg of you," pleaded the King Reynard. "I intend to have several days of feasting and merrymaking in honor of your visit." "Have it after we're gone, for we can't wait," said Dorothy decidedly. But seeing this displeased the king, she added, "If I'm going to get Ozma to invite you to her party, I'll have to find her as soon as possible, you know." In spite of all the beauty of Foxville and the gorgeous dresses of its inhabitants, both the girl and the Shaggy Man felt they were not quite safe there, and would be glad to see the last of it. "But it is now evening," the king reminded them, "and you must stay with us until morning anyhow. Therefore I invite you to be my guests at dinner, and to attend thereafter. Oh, and attend theater afterward. And sit in the royal box. Tomorrow morning, if you really insist upon it, you may resume your journey." They consented to this, and some of the fox servants led them to a suite of lovely rooms in the big palace. Button Bright was afraid to be left alone, so Dorothy took him into her own room, while a maid fox dressed the little girl's hair, which was a bit tangled, and put some bright fresh ribbons in it. Another maid fox combed the hair on poor Button Bright's face and head, then brushed it carefully, tying a pink bow on each of his pointed ears. The maids wanted to dress the children in fine costumes of woven feathers, such as all the foxes wore, but neither of them consented to that. "A sailor's suit and a fox head do not go well together," said one of the maids, "for no fox was ever a sailor that I can remember." "I'm not a fox," cried Button Bright. "Alas, no," agreed the maid, "but you've got a lovely fox head on your skinny shoulders, and that's almost as good as being a fox." The boy, reminded of his misfortune, began to cry again. Dorothy petted and comforted him, and promised to find some way to restore his own head. "If we can manage to get to Ozma," she said, "the princess will change you back to yourself in half a second. So you just wear that fox head as comfortably as you can, dear, and don't worry about it at all. It isn't nearly as pretty as your own head, no matter what the foxes say. But you can't get along with it but you can get along with it a little while longer, can't you?" "Don't know," said Button Bright doubtfully, but he didn't cry any more after that. Dorothy let the maids pin ribbons to her shoulders, after which they were ready for the king's dinner. When they met the Shaggy Man in the splendid drawing room of the palace, they found him just the same as before. He had refused to give up his shaggy clothes for new ones, because if he did that, he would no longer be the Shaggy Man, he said. He might have to get acquainted with himself all over again. He told Dorothy he had brushed his shaggy hair and whiskers, but she thought he must have brushed them the wrong way, for they were quite as shaggy as before. As for the company of foxes assembled to dine with the strangers, they were most beautifully costumed, and their rich dresses made Dorothy's simple gown and Button Bright's sailor suit and the Shaggy Man's shaggy clothes look commonplace. But they treated their guests with great respect, and the king's dinner was a very good dinner indeed. Foxes, as you know, are fond of chicken and other fowl, So they served chicken soup and roasted turkey and stewed duck and fried grouse and broiled quail and goose pie. And as the cooking was excellent, the king's guests enjoyed the meal and ate heartily of the various dishes. The party went to the theater, where they saw a play acted by foxes dressed in costumes of brilliantly colored feathers. The play was about a fox girl who was stolen by some wicked wolves and carried to their cave. And just as they were about to kill her and eat her, a company of fox soldiers marched up, saved the girl, and put all the wicked wolves to death. "How did you like it?" the king asked Dorothy. "Pretty well," she answered. "It reminds me of one of Mr. Aesop's fables." "Don't mention Aesop to me, I beg of you," exclaimed King Dox. "I hate that man's name. He wrote a good deal about foxes, but always made them out to be cruel and wicked, whereas we are gentle and kind, as you may see." But his fables showed you to be wise and clever, and more shrewd than the other animals," said the Shaggy Man thoughtfully. "So we are. There is no question about our knowing more than men do," replied the king proudly. "But we employ our wisdom to do good instead of harm, so that horrid Aesop did not know what he was talking about." They did not like to contradict him, because they felt that he ought to know the nature of the foxes better than men did. So they sat still and watched the play, and Button Bright became so interested that for a time he forgot he wore a fox head. Excuse me. Afterward, they went back to the palace, and slept in soft beds stuffed with feathers, for the foxes raised many fowl for food, and used their feathers for clothing and to sleep among. Dorothy wondered why the animals living in Foxville did not just wear their own hairy skins as wild foxes do. When she mentioned it to King Dox, he said they clothed themselves because they were civilized. "But you were born without clothes," she observed, "and you don't seem to me to need them." So were human beings born without clothes," he said, "and until they became civilized, they wore only their natural skins. But to become civilized means to dress as elaborately and prettily as possible, and to make a show of your clothes so your neighbors will envy you. And for that reason, both civilized foxes and civilized humans spend most of their time dressing themselves." "I don't," declared the Shaggy Man. "That is true," said the king, looking at him carefully. "But perhaps you are not civilized." After a sound sleep and a good night's rest, they had their breakfast with the king, and then bade His Majesty goodbye. "You have been kind to us," said poor Button Bright, said Dorothy, "and we've had a nice time in Foxville." Then, said King Dox, "perhaps you'll be good enough to get me an invitation to Princess Ozma's birthday celebration." "I'll try," she promised, "if I see her in time." "It's on the 21st, remember," he continued. "And if you'll just see if that I'm invited, I'll find a way to cross the dreadful desert into the marvelous land of Oz. I've always wanted to visit the Emerald City, so I'm sure it was fortunate you arrived here just when you did, you being Princess Ozma's friend, and able to visit me and getting the invitation." "If I see Ozma, I'll ask her to invite you," she replied. The Fox King had a delightful luncheon put up for them, which the Shaggy Man shoved in his pockets, and the Fox Captain escorted them to an arch at the side of the village opposite to the one they had entered. Here they found more soldiers guarding the road. "Are you afraid of enemies?" asked Dorothy. "No, because we are watchful and able to protect ourselves," answered the captain. "But this road leads to another village peopled by big, stupid beasts who might cause us trouble if they thought we were afraid of them." What beasts are they?" asked the Shaggy Man. The captain hesitated to answer. Finally, he said, "You will learn about them when you arrive at their city, but do not be afraid of them. Button Bright is so wonderfully clever, and has now such an intelligent face that I'm sure he will manage to find a way to protect you." This made Dorothy and the Shaggy Man rather uneasy, for they had not so much confidence in the Fox Boy's wisdom as the captain seemed to have. But as their escort would say no more about the beasts, they bade him goodbye and proceeded on their journey. Chapter 5. The Rainbow's Daughter. Toto, now allowed to run about as he pleased, was glad to be free again and able to bark at the birds and chase the butterflies. The country around them was charming, yet in the pretty fields of wild flowers and groves of leafy trees were no houses whatever, or a sign of any inhabitant. Birds flew through the air and cunning white rabbits darted amongst the tall grasses and green bushes. Dorothy noticed even the ants toiling busily along the roadway, bearing gigantic loads of clover seed, but of the people there were none at all. They walked briskly on for an hour or two, for even little Button-Bright was a good walker and did not tire easily. At length, as they turned a curve in the road, they beheld just before them a curious sight. A little girl, radiant and beautiful, shapely as a fairy, and exquisitely dressed, was dancing gracefully in the middle of a lonely road, whirling slowly this way and that, her dainty feet twinkling in sprightly fashion. She was clad in flowing, fluffy robes of soft material that reminded Dorothy of woven cobwebs, only it was colored in soft hintings of violet, rose, topaz, olive, azure, and white, mingled together most harmoniously in stripes which melted one into the other with soft blendings. Her hair was like spun gold and flowed around her in a cloud, no strand being fastened or confined by either pin or ornament or ribbon. Filled with wonder and admiration, our friends approached and stood watching for this fascinating dance. The girl was no taller than Dorothy, although more slender, nor did she seem any older than our little heroine. Suddenly she paused and abandoned the dance, as if for the first time observing the presence of strangers. She faced them, shy as a frightened fawn, poised upon one foot as if to fly at the next instant. Dorothy was astonished to see tears flowing from her violet eyes and trickling down her lovely rose-hued cheeks. The dainty maiden should dance and weep at the same time was indeed surprising. So Dorothy asked in a soft, sympathetic voice, "Are you unhappy, little girl?" "Very," was the reply. "I am lost." "Why, so are we," said Dorothy, smiling, "but we don't cry about it." "Don't you? Why not?" "'Cause I've been lost before and always got found again," answered Dorothy simply. "But I've never been lost before," murmured the dainty maiden, "and I'm worried and afraid." "You were dancing," remarked Dorothy in a puzzled tone of voice. "Oh, that was just to keep warm," explained the maiden quickly. "It was not because I felt happy or gay, I assure you." Dorothy looked at her closely. Her gauzy flowing robes might not be very warm, yet the weather wasn't at all chilly, but rather mild and balmy, like a spring day. "Who are you, dear?" she asked gently. "I'm Polychrome," was the reply. "Polly whom?" "Polychrome. I'm the daughter of the rainbow." "Oh," said Dorothy with a gasp. I didn't know the rainbow had children, but I might have known it before you spoke. You couldn't really be anything else." "Why not?" inquired Polychrome, as if surprised. "Because you are so lovely and sweet." The little maiden smiled through her tears, came up to Dorothy, and placed her slender fingers in the Kansas girl's chubby hand. "You'll be my friend, won't you?" she said pleadingly. "Of course. And what's your name?" "I'm Dorothy, and this is my friend Shaggy Man, who owns the lovely magnet. And this is Button-Bright, only you don't see him as he really is because the Fox King carelessly changed his head into a fox head. But the real Button-Bright is good to look at, and I hope to get him changed back to himself sometime." The Rainbow's Daughter nodded cheerfully, no longer afraid of her new companions. "But who is this?" she asked, pointing to Toto, who was sitting before her and wagging his tail in a most friendly manner, and admiring the pretty maid with his bright eyes. "Is this also some enchanted person?" "Oh no, Polly. I may call you Polly, mayn't I?" "Your whole name is Dorothy." "Call me Polly if you wish, Dorothy." "Well, Polly, Toto's just a dog, but he has more sense than Button-Bright, to tell the truth, and I'm very fond of him." "So am I," said Polly Crow, bending gracefully to pat Toto's head. "But how did the Rainbow's Daughter ever get on this lonely road and become lost?" Oops, that's the Shaggy Man saying that. "But how did the Rainbow's Daughter ever get on this lonely road and become lost?" asked the Shaggy Man, who listened wonderingly to all this. "Why, my father stretched his rainbow over here this morning so that one end of it touched this road," was the reply. "And I was dancing upon the pretty rays, as I love to do, and never noticed I was getting too far over the bend in the circle. Suddenly I began to slide, and I just went faster and faster until I at last bumped on the ground at the very end. Just then Father lifted the rainbow again, without noticing me at all. And though I tried to seize the end of it and hold fast, it melted away entirely, and I was left alone and helpless on the cold, hard earth." "It doesn't seem cold to me, Polly," said Dorothy, "but perhaps you're not warmly dressed." "It's so used to living near the sun." I'm so used to living near the sun," replied the Rainbow's Daughter, "that at first I feared I would freeze down here. But my dance has warmed me somehow, and now I wonder how I am ever to get home again." "Won't your father miss you and look for you, and let down another rainbow for you?" "Perhaps so, but he's busy just now, because it rains in so many parts of the world at this season. And he has to set his rainbows down in a lot of different places. What would you advise me to do, Dorothy?" "Come with us," was the answer. "I'm going to try to find a way to the Emerald City, which is the fairy land of Oz. Yeah, okay, I got that right. The Emerald City is ruled by a friend of mine, the Princess Ozma, and if we can manage to get there, I'm sure she will know a way to send you home with your father again." "Do you really think so?" asked Polly Crow anxiously. "I'm pretty sure." "Then I'll go with you," said the little maid, "for travel will help me keep warm, and Father can find me in one part of the world as well as another, if he gets time to look for me." "Come along, then," said the Shaggy Man cheerfully, and they started on once more. Polly walked beside Dorothy a while, holding her new friend's hand as if she feared to let it go, but her nature seemed as light and buoyant as her fleecy robes, where suddenly she darted ahead and whirled round in a giddy dance. Then she tripped back to them with sparkling eyes and smiling cheeks, having regained her usual happy mood and forgotten all her worry about being lost. They found her a charming companion, and her dancing and laughter, for she laughed at times like the tinkling of a silver bell, did much to enliven their journey and keep them contented. Chapter 6. The City of Beasts. When noon came, they opened the Fox King's basket for luncheon, and found a nice roasted turkey with cranberry sauce and some slices of bread and butter. As they sat down on the grass by the roadside, the Shaggy Man cut up the turkey with his pocket knife and passed slices of it around. "Haven't you any dewdrops or mist cakes or cloud buns?" asked Polychrome longingly. "Course not," replied Dorothy. "We eat solid things down here on the earth, but there's a bottle of cold tea. Try some, won't you?" The Rainbow's Daughter watched Button-Bright devour one leg of the turkey. "Is it good?" she asked. He nodded. "Do you think I could eat it?" "Not this," said Button-Bright. "But I mean another piece." "Dunno," he replied. "Well, I'm going to try, for I'm very hungry," she decided, and took a thin slice of the white turkey breast. which the Shaggy Man cut for her, as well as a bit of bread and butter. When she tasted it, Polychrome thought the turkey was good, better even than this cake's, but a little satisfied her hunger, and she finished with a tiny sip of cold tea. "That's about as much as a fly could eat," said Dorothy, who was making a good meal herself. "But I know some people in Oz who eat nothing at all."
"Who are they?" inquired the Shaggy Man.
"One is a scarecrow who's stuffed with straw, and the other a woodman made out of tin. They haven't any appetites inside of them, you see, so they never eat anything at all."
"Are they alive?" asked Button-Bright.
"Oh yes," replied Dorothy, "and they're very clever and very nice too. If we get to Oz, I'll introduce them to you."
"Do you really expect to get to Oz?" inquired the Shaggy Man, taking a drink of cold tea.
"I don't know what to expect," answered the child seriously, "but I've noticed if I happen to get lost, I'm almost sure to come to the land of Oz in the end, somehow or another. So I may get there this time, but I can't promise, you know. All I can do is wait and see."
"Will the scarecrow scare me?" asked Button-Bright.
"No, 'cause you're not a crow," she returned. "He has the loveliest smile you ever saw, only it's painted on, and he can't help it." Luncheon being over, they started again upon their journey, the Shaggy Man, Dorothy, and Button-Bright walking soberly along side by side, and the Rainbow's Daughter dancing merrily before them. Sometimes she darted along the road so swiftly that she was nearly out of sight, and then came tripping back to greet them with her silvery laughter. But once she came back more sedately to say, "There's a city a little way off." "I expected that," returned Dorothy, "for the fox people warned us there was one on this road. It's filled with stupid beasts of some sort, but we mustn't be afraid of them, 'cause they won't hurt us." "All right," said Button-Bright, but Polychrome didn't know whether it was all right or not. "It's a big city," she said, "and the roads run straight through it."
"Never mind," said the Shaggy Man. "As long as I carry the love magnet, every living thing will love me. And you may be sure I shan't allow any of my friends to be harmed in any way."
This comforted them somewhat, and they moved on again. Pretty soon they came to a signpost that read, "Half a mile to Dunkyton." Very interesting.
"Oh," said the Shaggy Man, "if they're donkeys, we've nothing to fear at all."
"They may kick," said Dorothy doubtfully.
"Then we will cut some switches and make them behave," he replied.
At the first tree he cut himself a long, slender switch from one of the branches, and shorter switches for the others. Before long, the road brought them to the gates of the city. There was a high wall all around, which had been whitewashed, and the gate just before our travelers was a mere opening in the wall with no bars across it. No towers or steeples or domes showed above the enclosure, nor was any living thing to be seen as our friends drew near. Suddenly, as they were about to boldly enter through the opening, there arose a harsh clamor of sound that swelled and echoed on every side until they were nearly deafened by the racket and had to put their fingers to their ears to keep the noise out. It was like the firing of many cannons, only there were no cannonballs or other missiles to be seen. It was like the rolling of mighty thunder, only not a cloud was in the sky. It was like the roar of countless breakers on a rugged seashore, only there was no sea or other water anywhere about. They hesitated to advance, but as the noise did no harm, they entered through the whitewashed wall and quickly discovered the cause of the turmoil. Inside were suspended many sheets of tin or thin iron, and against these metal sheets a row of donkeys were pounding their heels with vicious kicks. The Shaggy Man ran up to the nearest donkey and gave the beast a sharp blow with his switch. "Stop that noise!" he shouted, and the donkey stopped kicking the metal sheet and turned its head to look with surprise at the Shaggy Man.
He switched to the next donkey and made him stop, and the next, and then the next. Oops. So that gradually the rattling of the heels ceased and the awful noise subsided. The donkeys stood in a group and eyed the strangers with fear and trembling. "What do you mean by making such a racket?" asked the Shaggy Man sternly. "You're scaring away the foxes," said one of the donkeys meekly. "Usually they run fast enough when they hear the noise, which makes them afraid." "There are no foxes here," said the Shaggy Man. "I beg to differ with you. There's one anyhow," replied the donkey, sitting upright on its haunches and waving a hoof toward Button-Bright. "We saw him coming and thought the whole army of foxes was marching to attack us." "Button-Bright isn't a fox," explained the Shaggy Man. "He's only wearing a fox head for a time until he can get his own head back." "Oh, I see," remarked the donkey, waving its left ear reflectively. "I'm sorry we made such a mistake, and had all our work and worry for nothing." The other donkeys by this time were sitting up and examining the strangers with big, glassy eyes. They made a queer picture indeed, for they wore wide, white collars around their necks, and the collars had many scallops and points. The gentlemen donkeys wore high pointed caps set between their great ears, and the lady donkeys wore sunbonnets with holes cut at the top for their ears to stick through. But they had no other clothing except their hairy skins, although many wore gold and silver bangles on their front wrists, and bands of different metals on their rear ankles. When they were kicking, they had braced themselves with their front legs, but they all stood or sat upright on their hind legs and used the front ones as arms. Having no fingers or hands, the beasts were rather clumsy, as you may guess, but Dorothy was surprised to observe how many things they could do with their stiff, heavy hooves. Some of the donkeys were white, and some were brown, or gray, or black, or spotted, but their hair was sleek and smooth, and their broad collars and caps gave them a neat, if whimsical, appearance. "This is a nice way to welcome visitors, I must say," remarked the Shaggy Man in a reproachful tone. "Oh, we didn't mean to be impolite," replied a gray donkey, which had been not spoken before. "But you were not expected, nor did you send in your visiting cards, as it is proper to do." "There's some truth in that," admitted the Shaggy Man. "But now you are informed that we are important and distinguished travelers, I trust you will accord us proper consideration." These big words delighted the donkeys, and made them bow to the Shaggy Man with great respect. Very suspect. Sus guys. Said the Grey One, "You shall be taken before His Great and Glorious Majesty King Kikabray, who will greet you as becomes your exalted stations." "That's right," answered Dorothy. "Take us to someone who knows something." "Oh, we all know something, my child, or we shouldn't be donkeys," asserted the Grey One with dignity. "The word donkey means clever, you know." I didn't know it," she replied. "I thought it meant stupid." "Not at all, my child. If you will come look in the Encyclopedia Donkanira, you will find I'm correct. But come, I will myself lead you before our splendid, exalted, and most intellectual ruler." All donkeys loved big words, so it is no wonder the Grey One used so many of them. Oh boy. Chapter 7. The Shaggy Man's Transformation. They found the houses of the town all low and square and built of bricks, neatly whitewashed inside and out. The houses were not set in rows, forming regular streets, but placed here and there in a haphazard manner, which made it puzzling for a stranger to find his way. Stupid people must have streets and numbered houses in their cities to guide them where to go, observed the great donkey as he walked before the visitors on his hind legs in an awkward but comical manner. "The clever donkeys know their way about with such absurd without such absurd marks. Moreover, a mixed city is much prettier than one with straight streets.
Dorothy did not agree with this, but she said nothing to contradict it. Presently, she saw a sign on a house that read, Madame de Fake, Hoofist. And she asked their conductor, "What is a hoofist, please?"
"Oh, one who reads fortunes in your hoofs," replied the grey donkey.
"Oh, I see," said the little girl. "You are quite civilized here."
"Dunkiton," he replied, "is the center of the world's highest civilization."
They came to a house where two youthful donkeys were whitewashing the wall, and Dorothy stopped a moment to watch them. They dipped the ends of their tails, which were much like paintbrushes, into a pail of whitewash, backed up against the house, and wagged their tails right and left until the whitewash was rubbed on the wall, after which they dipped these funny brushes in the pail again and repeated their performance.
"That must be fun," said Button-Bright.
"No, it's work," replied the old donkey.
"But we make our youngsters do all the whitewashing to keep them out of mischief."
"Don't they go to school?" asked Dorothy.
"All donkeys are born wise," was the reply. "So the only school we need is the school of experience. Books are only for those who know nothing, and so are obliged to learn things from other people. In other words, the more stupid one is, the more he thinks he knows," observed the Shaggy Man.
The grey donkey paid no attention to this speech, because he had just stopped before a house which had painted over a doorway a pair of hoofs with a donkey tail between them and a rude crown and a scepter above. "I'll see if his magnificent majesty King Kikabray is at home," said he. He lifted his head and called, "Wee-haw, wee-haw, wee-haw," 3 times in a shocking voice, turning about and kicking with his heels against a panel of the door. Excuse me. For a time there was no reply. Then the door opened far enough to permit a donkey's head to stick out and look at them. It was a white head with big, awful ears and round, solemn eyes. "Have the foxes gone?" it asked in a trembling voice. "They haven't been here, most stupendous majesty," replied the grey one. "The new arrivals proved to be travelers of distinction."
"Oh," said the king in a relieved tone of voice, "let them come in."
He opened the door wide, and the party marched into a big room which Dorothy thought looked quite unlike a king's palace. There were mats of woven grasses on the floor, and the place was clean and neat, but His Majesty had no other furniture at all, perhaps because he didn't need it. He squatted down in the center of the room, and a little brown donkey ran and brought a big gold crown which it placed on the monarch's head, and a golden staff with a jeweled ball at the end of it, which the king held between his front hooves, and he sat upright.
"Now then," said His Majesty, waving his long ears gently to and fro, "tell me why you are here, and what you expect me to do for you."
He eyed Button-Bright rather sharply, as if afraid of the little boy's queer head, though it was the Shaggy Man who undertook the reply.
"Most noble king and supreme ruler of Dunkiton," he said, trying not to laugh in the solemn king's face, "we are strangers traveling through your dominions, and have entered your magnificent city because the road led through it, and there was no way to go around. All we desired is to pay respects to your majesty. The cleverest king in all the world, I'm sure, and then continue on our way."
The polite speech pleased the king very much indeed. It pleased him so much that it proved an unlucky speech for the Shaggy Man. Perhaps the love magnet helped to win His Majesty's affections, as well as the flattery. But however this may be, the white donkey looked kindly upon the speaker and said,
Only a donkey should be able to use such fine, big words, and you are too wise and admirable in all ways to be a mere man. Also, I feel that I love you as well as I do my own favorite people, so I will bestow upon you the greatest gift within my power, a donkey's head.
As he spoke, he waved his jeweled staff. Although the Shaggy Man cried out and tried to leap backward and escape, it proved of no use. Suddenly, his own head was gone, and a donkey head appeared in its place. A brown, shaggy head so absurd and droll that Dorothy and Polly both broke into merry laughter, and even Button-Bright's fox face wore a smile.
Dear me, cried the Shaggy Man,
feeling of his shaggy new head and his long ears.
What misfortune! What a great misfortune! Give me back my head, you stupid king, if you love me at all.
Don't you like it? Asked the king, surprised.
Yee-haw! I hate it. Take it away, quick, said the Shaggy Man.
But I can't do that, was the reply. My magic works only one way.
I can do things, but I can't undo them. You'll have to find the truth pond and bathe in its water in order to get back your own head. But I advise you not to do that. This head is much more beautiful than the old one.
That's a matter of taste, said Dorothy.
Where's the truth pond?
Asked the Shaggy Man earnestly. Somewhere in the land of Oz.
But just the exact location of it I cannot tell,
was the answer. Don't worry, Shaggy Man, said Dorothy, smiling because her friend wagged his new ears so comically. If the truth pond is in Oz, we'll be sure to find it when we get there.
Oh, are you going to the land of Oz?
Asked the King Kikabray. I don't know, she replied. But we've been told we are nearer to the land of Oz than to Kansas, and if that's so, the quickest way for me to get home is to find Ozma.
Do you know the mighty Princess Ozma?
Asked the king, his tone both surprised and eager. Of course I do. She's my friend, said Dorothy.
Then perhaps you'll do me a favor, continued the white donkey, much excited.
What is it? She asked.
Perhaps you can get me an invitation to Princess Ozma's birthday celebration, which will be the grandest royal function ever held in a fairyland. I'd love to go. Hee-haw! You deserve punishment rather than reward for giving me this dreadful head, said the Shaggy Man sorrowfully.
I wish you wouldn't say hee-haw so much, Polychrome begged him. It makes cold chills run down my spine. Run down my back, rather.
But I can't help it, my dear. My donkey head wants to bray continually, he replied. Doesn't your fox head want to yelp every minute? He asked Button-Bright.
Don't know, said the boy, still staring at the Shaggy Man's ears. These seemed to interest him greatly, and the sight also made him forget his own fox head, which was a comfort. What do you think, Polly? Shall I promise the Donkey King an invitation to Ozma's party? Asked Dorothy of the Rainbow's daughter, who was flitting about the room like a sunbeam because she could never keep still. Do as you please, dear, answered Polychrome. He might help to amuse the guests and the princess. Then, if you will give us some supper and a place to sleep tonight, and let us get started on our journey early tomorrow morning, said Dorothy to the king, I'll ask Ozma to invite you, if I happen to get to Oz.
Good, hee-haw, excellent, cried Kikabray, much pleased.
You shall all have fine suppers and good beds. What food would you prefer, a bread mash or ripe oats in the shell? Neither one, replied Dorothy promptly.
Perhaps plain hay or some sweet juicy grass would suit you better, suggested Kikabray musingly.
Is that all you have to eat? Asked the girl.
What more do you desire?
Well, you see, we're not donkeys, she explained, and so we're used to other food. The foxes gave us a nice supper in Foxville. We'd like some dewdrops and mist cakes, said Polychrome.
I prefer apples and a ham sandwich, declared the Shaggy Man, for although I have a donkey head, I still have my own particular stomach.
I want pie, said Button-Bright.
I think some beefsteak and chocolate layer cake would taste best, said Dorothy. Hee-haw! I declare, exclaimed the king. It seems each one of you wants a different food. How queer all living creatures are, except donkeys.
And donkeys like you are the queerest of all, laughed Polychrome.
Well, decided the king, I suppose my magic staff will produce the things you craved. If you are lacking good taste, it is not my fault.
With this, he waved his staff, the jeweled ball, and before them instantly appeared a tea table, set with linen and pretty dishes, and on the table were the very things they had wished for. Dorothy's beefsteak was smoking hot, and the Shaggy Man's apples were plump and rosy-cheeked. The king had not thought to provide chairs, so they all stood in their places around the table, knit with good appetite, being hungry. The Rainbow's daughter found 3 tiny dewdrops on a crystal plate, and Button-Bright had a slice of apple pie, which he devoured eagerly. Afterward, the king called Brown Donkey, which was his favorite servant, and bade it lead his guests to the vacant house, where they were to pass the night. It had only one room and no furniture except the beds of clean straw and a few mats of woven grasses, but our travelers were contented with these simple things because they realized it was the best the Donkey King had to offer them. As soon as it was dark, they lay down on the mats and slept comfortably until morning. At daybreak, there was a dreadful noise throughout the city. Every donkey in the place brayed. When he heard this, the Shaggy Man woke up and called out, "Hee-haw!" as loud as he could. "Stop that," said Button-Bright in a cross voice. But Dorothy and Polly looked at the Shaggy Man reproachfully. "I couldn't help it, my dears," he said, as if ashamed of his bray, "but I'll try not to do it again." Of course they forgave him, for, as he still had the love magnet in his pocket, they were all obliged to love him as much as ever. They did not see the king again, but Kikabray remembered them, for a table appeared again in their rooms with the same food upon it as the night before. "Don't want pie for breakfast," said Button-Bright. "I'll give you some of my beefsteak," proposed Dorothy. "There's plenty for us all." That suited the boy better, but the Shaggy Man said he was content with his apples and sandwich, although he ended the meal by eating Button-Bright's pie. Polly liked her dewdrops and mince cakes better than any other food, so they all enjoyed an excellent breakfast. Toto had the scraps left from the beefsteak, and he stood up nicely on his hind legs while Dorothy fed them to him. Breakfast ended, they passed through the village to the side opposite that which they had entered, the brown servant donkey guiding them through a maze of scattered houses. There was the road again, leading far away into the unknown country beyond. "King Brick-a-Bray says that you must not forget his invitation," said the brown donkey, as they passed through the opening in the wall. "I shan't," promised Dorothy. Perhaps no one had ever beheld more strangely assorted groups than the ones which now walked out along the road, through pretty green fields and past groves of feathery pepper trees and fragrant mimosa. Polychrome, her beautiful gauzy robes floating around her like a rainbow cloud, went first, dancing back and forth and darting now here to pluck a wildflower, or there to watch a beetle crawl across the path. Toto ran after her at times, barking joyously the while, only to become sober again and trot along at Dorothy's heels. The little Kansas girl walked holding Button-Bright's hand clasped in her own, and the wee boy with his fox head, covered by the sailor hat, presented an odd appearance. Strangest of all, perhaps, was the Shaggy Man with the shaggy donkey head, who shuffled along in the rear, with his hands thrust deep in his big pockets. None of the party was really unhappy. All were straying in an unknown land, and suffered more or less annoyance and discomfort, but they realized they were having a fairy adventure in a fairy country, and were interested in finding out what would happen next. Chapter 8. The Musicker. About the middle of the forenoon, they began to go up a long hill. By and by, this hill suddenly dropped into a pretty valley, where the travelers saw, to their surprise, a small house standing by the roadside. It was the first house they had seen, and they hastened into the valley to discover who lived there. No one was in sight as they approached, but when they began to get nearer to the house, they heard a queer sound coming from it. They could not make it out at first, but as they became louder, our friends thought they heard a sort of music that was made by a wheezy hand organ. The music fell upon their ears this way: tiddle whittle iddle, pom pom, pom pom pom, tiddle tiddle tiddle, pom pom pa. What is it? A band or a mouth organ? Asked Dorothy. Don't know, said Button Bright. That sounds to me like they played like a played-out phonograph, said the Shaggy Man, lifting his enormous ears to listen. Oh, there just couldn't be a funny graph in Fairyland, cried Dorothy. It is rather pretty, isn't it? Asked Polychrome, trying to dance to the strains. Tiddle whittle iddle, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom. Came the music to their ears, more distinctly as they drew nearer to the house. Presently they saw a little fat man sitting on a bench before the door. He wore a red braided jacket that reached to his waist, a blue waistcoat, and white trousers with gold stripes down the side. On his bald head was perched a little round red cap, held in place by a rubber elastic under his chin. His face was round, his eyes a faded blue, and he wore white cotton gloves. The man leaned on a stout gold-headed cane, bending forward on his seat to watch his visitors approach. Singularly enough, the musical sounds they had heard seemed to come from the inside of the fat man himself, for he was playing no instrument, nor was any to be seen near him. They came up and stood in a row staring at him, and he stared back while the queer sounds came from him as before. Tiddle-iddle-iddle, pom pom, pom pom, pom pom. Tiddle-whittle-iddle, pom pom, pa. Why, he's a regular musicer, said Button Bright. What's a musicer? Asked Dorothy. Him, said the boy. Hearing this, the fat man sat up a little stiffer than before, as if he had received a compliment, and still came the sounds. Tiddle-whittle-iddle, pom pom, pom pom. Stop it, cried the Shaggy Man, earnestly. Stop that dreadful noise. The fat man looked at him sadly, and began his reply. When he spoke, the music changed, and the words seemed to accompany the notes. He said, or rather sang, It isn't a noise that you hear, but music harmonic and clear. My breath makes me play like an organ all day. That bass note is in my left ear. How funny, exclaimed Dorothy. He says his breath makes the music. That's all nonsense, declared the Shaggy Man, but now the music began again and they all listened carefully. My lungs are full of reeds like those, and organs therefore I suppose. If I breathe in or out my nose, the reeds are bound to play. So as I breathe to live, you know, I squeeze out music as I go. I'm very sorry this is so. Forgive my piping, pray. Poor man, said Polychrome. He can't help it. What a great misfortune it is. Yes, replied the Shaggy Man. We are only obliged to hear his music for a short time until we leave him and go away. But the poor fellow must listen to himself as long as he lives. And that's enough to drive him crazy. Don't you think so? Dunno, said Button Bright. Toto said, bow wow, and the others laughed. Perhaps that's why he lives alone, suggested Dorothy. Yes, if he had neighbors, they might do him an injury, responded the Shaggy Man. All the while, the little fat musicer was breathing the notes, tiddle-iddle-iddle, boom-pom-pom. And they had to speak loud in order to hear themselves. The Shaggy Man said, Who are you, sir? The reply came in the shape of this sing-song. I am Allegro da Capo, a very famous man. Just find another higher low to match me if you can.
Some people try, but can't play, and have to practice every day. But I've seen musical always, since first my life began.
Why, I believe he's proud of it, exclaimed Dorothy. And seems to me I've heard worse music than he makes. Where? Asked Button-Bright. I've forgotten just now. But Mr. De Capo is certainly a strange person, isn't he? And perhaps he's the only one of his kind in the world. This praise seemed to please the little fat musicer, for he swelled out his chest, looked important, and sang as follows. I wear no band around me, and yet I am a band. I do not strain to make my strains, but on the other hand, my tute is always destitute of flats or other errors. To C sharp and B natural are, for me, but minor terrors. I don't quite understand that, said Polychrome with a puzzled look, but perhaps it's because I'm accustomed only to music of the spheres. What's that? Asked Button-Bright. Oh, poly means the atmospheres and hemispheres, I suppose, explained Dorothy. Oh, said Button-Bright. Bow wow, said Toto. Bow wow. But the musicer was still breathing his constant oom-pom-pom, oom-pom-pom. And it seemed to jar on the Shaggy Man's nerves. Stop it, can't you? He cried angrily. Or breathe in a whisper, or put clothespins on your nose. Do something, anyhow. But the fat one, with a sad look, sang his answer. Music hath charms, and it may soothe even the savage, they say. So if savage you feel, just listen to my reel. Will soothe to say, that's the real way. The Shaggy Man had to laugh at this, and when he laughed, he stretched his donkey mouth wide open. Said Dorothy, I don't know how good his poetry is, but it seems to fit the notes, so that's all can be expected. I like it, said Button-Bright, who was staring hard at the musicer, his little legs spread wide apart. To the surprise of his companions, the boy asked this long question. If I swallowed a mouth organ, what would I be? An organette, said the Shaggy Man. But come, my dears, I think the best thing we can do is to continue on our journey before Button-Bright swallows anything. We must try to find the Land of Oz, you know. Hearing this speech, the musicer sang quickly, If you go to the Land of Oz, please take me along, because on Ozma's birthday I'm anxious to play the loveliest song there ever was. No, thank you, said Dorothy. We prefer to travel alone. But if I see Ozma, I'll tell her you want to come to her birthday party. Chapter 9. Facing the Scoodlers. Oh boy. The country wasn't so pretty now. Before the travelers appeared a rocky plain covered with hills on which grew nothing green. They were nearing some low mountains too, and the road, which before had been smooth and pleasant to walk on, grew rough and uneven. Button-Bright's little feet stumbled more than once, and Polychrome ceased her dancing because the walking was now difficult. It was now so difficult that she had no trouble to keep warm. It had become afternoon, yet there wasn't a thing for their luncheon except 2 apples which the Shaggy Man had taken from the breakfast table. He divided these into 4 pieces and gave a portion to each of his companions. Dorothy and Button-Bright were glad to get theirs, but Polly was satisfied with a small bite, and Toto did not like apples. Did you know, asked the Rainbow's daughter, if this is the right road to the Emerald City? No, I don't, replied Dorothy, but it's the only road in this part of the country, so we might as well go to the end of it. It looks now as if it might end pretty soon, remarked the Shaggy Man. And what shall we do if it does? Don't know, said Button-Bright. Thank you, Button-Bright. As usual, you're a ray of information. If I had my magic belt, replied Dorothy thoughtfully, it could do us a lot of good just now. What is your magic belt? Asked Polychrome. It's a thing I captured from the Gnome King one day, and it can do most
any wonderful thing, but I left it with Ozma, you know, because magic won't work in Kansas, but only in fairy countries." "Is this a fairy country?" asked Button-Bright. "I should think you'd know," said the little girl gravely. "If it wasn't a fairy country, you couldn't have a fox head, and the Shaggy Man couldn't have a donkey head, and the Rainbow's Daughter would be invisible." "What's that?" asked the boy. "You don't seem to know anything, Button-Bright. Invisible is the thing you can't see." "Then Toto is invisible," declared the boy. And Dorothy found he was right. Toto had disappeared from view, but they could hear him barking furiously among the heaps of gray rocks ahead of them. They moved forward a little faster to see what the dog was barking at, and found perched upon a point of rock by the roadside a curious creature. It had the form of a man, middle-sized and rather slender and graceful. But as it sat silent and motionless upon the peak, they could see that its face was black as ink, and it wore a black cloth costume, made like a union suit, and fitting tight to its skin. Its hands were black too, and its toes curled down like a bird's. The creature was black all over except its hair, which was fine and yellow, and banged in front, across the black forehead, and cut close at the sides. The eyes, which were fixed steadily upon the barking dog, were small and sparkling, and looked like the eyes of a weasel. "What in the world do you suppose that is?" asked Dorothy in a hushed voice, as that little group of travelers stood watching the creature. "Don't know," said Button-Bright. The king gave a jump. The thing gave a jump and turned halfway around, sitting in the same place, but with the other side of its body facing them. Instead of being black, it was now pure white, with a face like that of a clown in a circus, and hair of a brilliant purple. The creature could bend either way, and its white toes now curled the same way the black ones did on the other side had done. Oh no, it's Monokuma. Danganronpa. "It has a face, both front and back," whispered Dorothy wonderingly. "Only there's no back at all, but two fronts." Having made the turn, the being sat motionless as before, while Toto barked louder at the white man than he had done at the black one. "Once," said the Shaggy Man, "I had a jumping jack like that, with two faces." "Was it alive?" asked Button-Bright. "No," replied the Shaggy Man. "It worked on strings and was made of wood." "Wonder if this thing works on strings. Wonder if this works with strings," said Dorothy. But Polychrome cried, "Look!" where another creature just like the first had appeared sitting on another rock, its black side toward them. The two twisted their heads around and showed the black face on the white side of one, and a white face on the black side of the other. "How curious," said Polychrome. And how loose their heads seem to be. Are they friendly to us, do you think?" "Can't tell, Polly," replied Dorothy. "Let's ask them." The creatures flopped first one way and then the other, showing black or white by turns. And now another joined them, appearing on another rock. Our friends had come to a little hollow in the hills, and the place where they now stood was surrounded by jagged peaks of rock, except where the road ran through. "Now there are 4 of them," said the Shaggy Man. 5, declared Polychrome. 6, said Dorothy. "Lots of 'em," cried Button-Bright. And so there were, quite a row of 2-sided black and white creatures sitting on the rocks all around. Toto stopped barking and ran between Dorothy's feet, where he had crouched down as if afraid. The creatures did not look pleasant or friendly, to be sure, and the Shaggy Man's donkey face became solemn indeed. "Ask 'em who they are and what they want," whispered Dorothy. So the Shaggy Man called out in a loud voice, "Who are you?" "Scoodlers," they yelled in chorus, their voices sharp and shrill. "What do you want?" called the Shaggy Man. You!
They yelled, pointing their thin fingers at the group. They all flopped around so they were white, and then flopped back again so they were black.
What do you want us for?
Asked the shaggy man uneasily.
Soup!
They all shouted, as if with one voice.
Goodness me, said Dorothy, trembling a little. The Scoodlers must be regular cannibals.
Don't want to be soup, protested Button Bright, beginning to cry.
Hush, dear, said the little girl, trying to comfort him. We don't any of us want to be soup, but don't worry, the Shaggy Man will take care of us.
Will he? Asked Polychrome, who did not like the Scoodlers at all, and kept close to Dorothy.
I'll try,
promised the Shaggy Man, but he looked worried. Happening just then to feel the love magnet in his pocket, he said to the creatures with more confidence,
Don't you love me?
Yes, they all shouted together.
Then you mustn't harm me or my friends, said the Shaggy Man firmly. We love you in soup,
they yelled, and in a flash they turned their white sides to the front.
How dreadful, said Dorothy. This is a time, Shaggy Man, when you get loved too much.
Don't want to be soup, wailed Button Bright again, and Toto began to whine dismally, as if he didn't want to be soup either.
The only thing to do, said the Shaggy Man to his friends in a low tone, is to get out of this pocket in the rocks as soon as we can, and leave the Scoodlers behind us. Follow me, my dears, and don't pay any attention to what they do or say.
With this, he began to march along the road to the opening in the rocks ahead, and the others kept close behind him. But the Scoodlers closed up in front, as if to bar their way, so the Shaggy Man stepped down and picked up a loose stone, which he threw at the creatures to scare them from the path. At this, the Scoodlers raised a howl. Two of them picked up their heads from their shoulders and hurled them at the Shaggy Man, with such a force that he fell over in a heap, greatly astonished. The two now ran forward with swift leaps, caught up their heads, and put them on again, after which they sprang back to their positions on the rocks. Chapter 10. Escaping the Soup Kettle. The Shaggy Man got up and felt himself to see if he was hurt, but he was not. One of the heads had struck his breast, and the other his left shoulder. Yet though they had knocked him down, the heads were not hard enough to bruise him.
Come on, he said firmly. We've got to get out of here some way. And forward he started again.
The Scoodlers began yelling and throwing their heads in great numbers at our frightened friends. The Shaggy Man was knocked over again, and so was Button Bright, who kicked his heels against the ground and howled as loud as he could, although he was not hurt one bit. One head stroked Toto, who first yelped and then grabbed the head by an ear and started running away with it. The Scoodlers, who had thrown their heads, began to scramble down and run to pick them up with wonderful quickness. But the one whose head Toto had stolen found it hard to get back again. This is mine now, said Toto. The head couldn't see the body with either pair of its eyes, because the dog was in the way, so the headless scooter stumbled around and over the rocks, and tripped on them more than once in its effort to regain its top. Toto was trying to get outside of the rocks and roll the head down the hill, but some of the other Scoodlers came to the rescue of their unfortunate comrade and pelted the dog with their own heads until he was obliged to drop his burden and hurry back to Dorothy. The little girl and the Rainbow's daughter had both escaped the shower of heads, but they saw now that it would be useless to try and run away from the dreadful Scoodlers.
We may as well submit, declared the Shaggy Man in a rueful voice.
As he got upon his feet again, he turned toward their foes and asked,
What do you want us to do?
Come, they cried in a triumphant chorus, and at once they sprang from the rocks and surrounded their captives on all sides. One funny thing about the Scoodlers was that they could walk in either direction, coming or going, without turning around, because they had two faces, and as Dorothy had said, two front sides. And their feet were shaped like the letter T upside down. They moved with great rapidity, and there was something about their glittering eyes and contrasting colors and removable heads that inspired the poor prisoners with horror and made them long to escape. But the creatures led their captives away from the rocks and the road down the hill by a side path until they came before a low mountain of rock that looked like a huge bowl turned upside down. At the edge of this mountain was a deep gulf, so deep that when you looked into it, there was nothing but blackness below. Across the gulf was a narrow bridge of rock, and at the other end of the bridge was an arched opening that led into a mountain. Over this bridge the Scoodlers led their prisoners, through the opening into the big mountain, which they had found to be an immense hollow dome, lighted by several holes in the roof. All around the circular space were built rock houses set close together, each with a door in the front wall. None of these houses was more than 6 feet wide, and the Scoodlers were thin people sidewise, and did not need much room. So vast was the dome that there was a large space in the middle of the cave, in front of all these houses, where the creatures might congregate, as in a great hall. It made Dorothy shudder to see a huge iron kettle suspended by a stout chain in the middle of the place, and underneath the kettle a great heap of kindling wood and shavings ready to light. "What's that?" asked the Shaggy Man, drawing back as they approached the place, so that they were forced to push him forward. "The soup kettle," yelled the Scoodlers, and then they shouted in the next breath, "We're hungry!" Button-Bright, holding Dorothy's hand in one chubby fist and Polly's hand in another, was so affected by the shout that he began to cry again, repeating the protest. "Don't want to be soup, I don't." "Never mind," said the Shaggy Man consolingly. "I ought to make enough soup to feed them all, I'm so big, so I'll ask them to put me in the kettle first." "All right," said Button-Bright more cheerfully. But the Scoodlers were not ready to make the soup yet. They led the captives into a house at the farthest side of the cave, a house somewhat wider than the others. "Who lives here?" asked the Rainbow's Daughter. The Scoodlers nearest replied, "The Queen." It made Dorothy hopeful to learn that a woman ruled over these fierce creatures, but a moment later they were ushered by 2 or 3 of the escort into a gloomy, bare room, and her hope died away. For the Queen of the Scoodlers proved to be much more dreadful in appearance than any of her people. One side of her was a fiery red, with jet black hair and green eyes, and the other side was bright yellow, with crimson hair and black eyes. She wore a short skirt of red and yellow, and her hair, instead of being banged, was a tangle of short curls upon which rested a circular crown of silver, much dented and twisted because the Queen had thrown her head so many things so many times. Her form was lean and bony, and both her faces were deeply wrinkled. "What have we here?" asked the Queen sharply, as her friends were made to stand before her. "Soup!" cried the guard of the Scoodlers, speaking together. "We're not," said Dorothy indignantly. "We're nothing of the sort." "Ah, but you will be soon," retorted the Queen, a grim smile making her look more dreadful than before. "Pardon me, my most beautiful vision," said the Shaggy Man, bowing before the Queen politely. "I must require your serene highness to let us go on our way, without being made into soup, for I own the love magnet, and whoever meets me must love me and all my friends."
True, replied the Queen. "We love you very much, so much that we intend to eat your broth with real pleasure. But tell me, do you think I am beautiful?"
"You won't be at all beautiful if you eat me," he said, shaking his head sadly. "Handsome is as handsome does, you know." The Queen turned to Button-Bright.
Do you think I'm beautiful? She asked.
No, said the boy. You're ugly.
I think you're a fright, said Dorothy. If you could see yourself, you'd be terribly scared, added Polly.
The Queen scowled at them and flopped from her red side to her yellow side.
Take them away, she commanded the guard, and at 6 o'clock run them through the meat chopper and start the soup kettle boiling. And put plenty of salt in the broth this time, or I'll punish the cook severely.
Any onions, Your Majesty? Asked one of the guard.
Plenty of onions, and garlic, and a dash of red pepper. Now go.
The Scoodlers led the captives away and shut them up in one of the houses, leaving only a single Scoodler to keep guard. The place was a sort of storehouse containing bags of potatoes and baskets of carrots, onions, and turnips. These, said the guard, pointing to the vegetables, we used to flavor our soups with. The prisoners were rather disheartened this time, for they saw no way to escape and did not know how soon it would be to 6 o'clock, and time for the meat chopper to begin work. But the Shaggy Man was brave and did not intend to submit to such a horrid fate without a struggle.
I'm going to fight for our lives, he whispered to the children, for if I fail, we will be no worse off than before, and to sit here quietly until we are made into soup would be foolish and cowardly.
The Scoodler on guard stood near the doorway, turning his first white side toward them, and then his black side, as if he wanted to show all his greedy 4 eyes the sight of so many fat prisoners. The captives sat in a sorrowful group at the other end of the room, except Polychrome, who danced back and forth in the little space and little place to keep herself warm, for she felt the chill of the cave. Whenever she approached the Shaggy Man, he would whisper something in her ear, and Polly would nod her pretty head as if she understood. The Shaggy Man told Dorothy and Button-Bright to stand before him while he emptied the potatoes out of one of the sacks. When this had been secretly done, little Polychrome, dancing near to the guard, suddenly reached out her hand and slapped his face, the next instant whirling away from him, quickly to rejoin her friends. The angry Scoodler had once picked off his head and hurled it at the Rainbow Daughter. But the Shaggy Man was expecting that, and caught the head very neatly, putting it in the sack, which he tied at the mouth. The body of the guard, not having eyes of its head to guide it, ran here and there in an aimless manner, and the Shaggy Man easily dodged it and opened the door. Fortunately, there was no one in the big cave at the moment, so he told Dorothy and Polly to run as fast as they could for the entrance and out across the narrow bridge.
I'll carry Button-Bright, he said, for he knew the little boy's legs were too short to run fast.
Dorothy picked up Toto and then seized Polly's hands and ran swiftly toward the entrance to the cave. The Shaggy Man perched Button-Bright on his shoulders and ran after them. They soon moved so quickly, and their escape was so wholly unexpected that they had almost reached the bridge when one of the Scoodlers looked out of his house and saw them. The creature raised a shrill cry that brought all of its fellows bounding out of the numerous doors, and at once they started to chase. Dorothy and Polly reached the bridge and crossed it when the Scoodlers began throwing their heads. One of the queer missiles struck the Shaggy Man on the back and nearly knocked him over, but he was at the mouth of the cave now, so he set Button-Bright down and told the boy to run across the bridge to Dorothy. Then the Shaggy Man turned around and faced his enemies, standing just outside the opening, and as fast as they threw their heads at him, he caught them and tossed them back into the black gulf below. The headless bodies of the foremost Scoodlers kept the others from running close up, but they also threw their heads in an effort to stop the escaping prisoners. The Shaggy Man caught them all and sent them whirling down into the black gulf. Among them he noticed the crimson and yellow head of the Queen, and this he tossed after the others with right good will. Presently, every Scoodler of the lot had thrown their head, and every head was dropped in the deep gulf. And now the helpless bodies of the creatures were mixed together in the cave and wriggling around in vain attempt to discover what had become of their heads. The Shaggy Man laughed and walked across the bridge to rejoin his companions.
"It's lucky I learned to play baseball when I was young," he remarked, "for I caught all those heads easily and never missed one. But come along, little ones. The Scoodlers will never bother us or anyone else anymore."
Button-Bright was still frightened and kept insisting, "I don't want to be soup," for the victory had been gained so suddenly that the boy could not realize they were safe and free. But the Shaggy Man assured him that all the danger of their being made into soup was now past, as the Scoodlers would be unable to eat soup for some time to come. So now, anxious to get away from the horrid, gloomy cave as soon as possible, they hastened up the hillside and regained the road just beyond the place where they had first met the Scoodlers. And you may be sure they were glad to find their feet on the old familiar path again. Chapter 11. Johnny Do It Does It. "It's getting awful rough walking," said Dorothy as they trudged along. Button-Bright gave a deep sigh and said he was hungry. Indeed, all were hungry, and thirsty too, for they had eaten nothing but apples since breakfast, so their steps lagged and they grew silent and weary. At last, they slowly passed over the crest of a barren hill and saw before them a line of green trees with a strip of grass at their feet. An agreeable fragrance was wafted toward them. Our travelers, hot and tired, ran forward on beholding this refreshing sight, and were not long in coming to the trees. Here they found a spring of pure bubbling water, around which the grass was full of wild strawberry plants, their pretty red berries ripe and ready to eat. Some of the trees bore yellow oranges, and some russet pears, so the hungry adventurers suddenly found themselves provided with plenty to eat and to drink. They lost no time picking the biggest strawberries and ripest oranges, and soon had feasted to their heart's content. Walking beyond the line of trees, they saw before them a fearful, dismal desert, everywhere gray sand. At the edge of this awful waste was a large white sign with black letters neatly painted upon it, and the letters made these words: "All persons are warned not to venture upon this desert, for the deadly sands will turn any living flesh to dust in an instant. Beyond this barrier is the land of Oz, but no one can reach the beautiful country because of these destroying sands." "Oh," said Dorothy, when the Shaggy Man had read the sign aloud. "I've seen this desert before, and it's true. No one can live who tries to walk upon the sands." "Then we mustn't try," answered the Shaggy Man thoughtfully. "But as we can't go ahead, and there's no use going back, what shall we do next?" "Don't know," said Button-Bright. "I'm sure I don't know either," added Dorothy despondently. "I wish my father would come for me," sighed the pretty Rainbow's daughter. "I would take you all to live upon the rainbow, where you could dance along the rays from morning till night, without a care or worry of any sort. But I suppose Father's too busy just now to search the world for me." "Don't want to dance," said Button-Bright, sitting down wearily upon the grass. "It's very good of you, Polly," said Dorothy. "But there are other things that would suit me better than dancing on rainbows. I'm afraid they'd be kind of soft and squashy underfoot anyhow, although they're so pretty to look at." This didn't help solve the problem, and they all fell silent and looked at one another questioningly. "Really, I don't know what to do," muttered the Shaggy Man, gazing hard at Toto. And the little dog wagged his tail and said, "Bow wow," just as if he could not tell either what to do. Button-Bright got a stick and began to dig into the earth, and the others watched him for a while in deep thought. Finally, the Shaggy Man said, "It's nearly evening now, so we may as well sleep in this pretty place and get rested. Perhaps by morning we can decide what is best to be done." There was little chance to make the beds for the children, but the leaves of trees grew thickly and would serve to keep off the night dews. So the Shaggy Man piled soft grasses in the thickest shade, and when it was dark, they lay down and slept peacefully until morning. Long after the others were asleep, however, the Shaggy Man sat in the starlight by the spring, gazing thoughtfully into its bubbling waters. Suddenly, he smiled and nodded to himself as if he had found a good thought, after which he, too, laid himself down under a tree and was soon lost in slumber. In the bright morning sunshine, as they ate the strawberries and sweet juicy pears, Dorothy said, "Polly, can you do any magic?" "No, dear," answered Polychrome, shaking her dainty head. "You ought to know some magic, being the Rainbow's daughter," continued Dorothy earnestly. But we who live on the rainbow among the fleecy clouds have no use for magic," replied Polychrome. "What I'd like," said Dorothy, "is to find some way to cross the desert to the land of Oz and its Emerald City. I've crossed it already, you know, more than once. First a cyclone carried my house over, and some silver shoes brought me back again, in half a second. Then Ozma took me over on her magic carpet, and the Gnome King's magic belt took me home that time. You see, it was magic that did it every time, except the first, and we can't expect a cyclone to happen along and take us to the Emerald City now." "No, indeed," returned Polly with a shudder. "I hate cyclones anyway." "That's why I wanted to find out if you could do any magic," said the little Kansas girl. "I'm sure I can't, and I'm sure Button Bright can't. And the only magic the Shaggy Man has is the love magnet, which won't help us much." "Don't be too sure of that, my dear," spoke the Shaggy Man, a smile on his donkey face. "I may not be able to do magic myself, but I can call to us a powerful friend who loves me because I own the love magnet, and this friend will surely be able to help us." "Who is your friend?" asked Dorothy. "Johnny Dewett." "What can Johnny do?" "Anything," answered the Shaggy Man with confidence. "Ask him to come," she exclaimed eagerly. The Shaggy Man took the love magnet from his pocket and unwrapped the paper that surrounded it. Holding the charm in the palm of his hand, he looked at it steadily and said these words, "Dear Johnny Dewett, come to me. I need you bad as bad can be."
"Well, here I am," said a cheery little voice. "But you shouldn't say you need me bad, 'cause I'm always, always good."
At this, they quickly whirled around to find a funny little man sitting on a big copper chest, puffing a smoke from his long pipe. His hair was gray, and his whiskers were gray, and these whiskers were so long that he had wound the ends of them around his waist and tied them in a hard knot underneath the leather apron that reached from his chin nearly to his feet, and which was soiled and scratched as if it had been used a long time. His nose was broad and stuck up a little, but his eyes were twinkling and merry. The little man's hands and arms were as hard and tough as the leather in his apron, and Dorothy thought Johnny Dewett looked as if he had done a lot of hard work in his lifetime. "Good morning, Johnny," said the Shaggy Man. "Thank you for coming to me so quickly."
"I never waste any time," said the newcomer promptly. "But what's happened to you? Where did you get that donkey head? Really, I wouldn't have known you at all, Shaggy Man, if I hadn't looked at your feet."
The Shaggy Man introduced Johnny Dewett to Dorothy and Toto and Button Bright and the Rainbow's daughter, and told him the story of their adventures, adding that they were anxious now to reach the Emerald City in the land of Oz, where Dorothy had friends who would take care of them and send them safe home again. "But," said he, "we find that we can't cross this desert, which turns all living flesh that touches it to dust. So I have asked you to come and help us." Johnny Dewett puffed his pipe and looked carefully at the dreadful desert in front of them, stretching so far they could not see its end.
"You must ride," he said briskly.
"What in?" asked the Shaggy Man.
"In a sandboat, which has runners like a sled and sails like a ship. The wind will blow you swiftly across the desert, and the sand cannot touch your flesh to turn it to dust."
"Good!" cried Dorothy, clapping her hands delightedly. "That was the way the magic carpet took us across. We didn't have to touch the horrid sand at all."
"But where's the sandboat?" asked the Shaggy Man, looking all around him. "I'll make you one," said Johnny Dewett. As he spoke, he knocked the ashes from his pipe and put it in his pocket. Then he unlocked his copper chest and lifted the lid, and Dorothy saw it was full of shining tools of all sorts and shapes. Johnny Dewett moved quickly now, so quickly that they were astonished at the work he was able to accomplish. He had in his chest a tool for everything he wanted to do, and these must have been magic tools because they did their work so fast and so well. The man hummed a little song as he worked, and Dorothy tried to listen to it. She thought the words were something like this: The only way to do a thing is to do it when you can, and do it cheerfully, and sing, and work and think and plan. The only real and happy one is he who dares to shirk. The only really happy one is he who cares to work. Whatever Johnny Dewett was singing, he was certainly doing things, and they all stood by and watched him in amazement. He seized an axe and in a couple of chops felled a tree. Next he took a saw and in a few minutes sawed the tree trunk into broad, long boards. He then nailed the boards together into the shape of a boat, about 12 feet long and 4 feet wide. He cut from another tree a long, slender pole, which, when trimmed of its branches and fastened upright in the center of the boat, served as a mast. From the chest he drew a coil of rope and a big bundle of canvas, and with these, still humming his song, he rigged up a sail, arranging it so it could be raised or lowered upon the mast. Dorothy fairly gasped with wonder to see this thing grow so speedily before her eyes. Both Button-Bright and Polly looked on with the same absorbed interest. "It ought to be painted," said Johnny Dewett, tossing his tools back into his chest. "For that would make it look prettier. But though I can paint it for you in 3 seconds, it would take an hour to dry, and that's a waste of time." "We don't care how it looks," said the Shaggy Man, "if only it will take us across the desert." "It will do that," declared Johnny Dewett. "All you need to worry about is tipping over. Did you ever sail a ship?" "I've seen one sailed," said the Shaggy Man. "Good. Sail this boat the way you've seen a ship sailed, and you'll be across the sands before you know it." With this, he slammed down the lid of the chest, and the noise made them all wink. While they were winking, the workmen disappeared, tools and all. Chapter 12. The Deadly Desert Crossed. "Oh, that's too bad," cried Dorothy. "I wanted to thank Johnny Dewett for all his kindness to us." "He hasn't the time to listen to thanks," replied the Shaggy Man, "but I'm sure he knows we're grateful. I suppose he is already at work in some other part of the world." They now looked more carefully at the sandboat, and saw that the bottom was mottled with 2 sharp runners, which would glide through the sand, and the front of the sandboat was pointed like the bow of a ship, and there was a rudder at the stern to steer by. It had been built just at the edge of the desert, so all its length lay upon the gray sand except the after part, which still rested on the strip of grass. "Get in, my dears," said the Shaggy Man. "I'm sure I can manage this boat as well as any sailor. All you need to do is sit in your places." Dorothy got in, Toto in her arms, and sat on the bottom of the boat, just in front of the mast. Button-Bright sat in front of Dorothy, while Polly leaned over the bow. The Shaggy Man knelt behind the mast. When all were ready, he raised the sail halfway. The wind caught it. At once the sandboat started forward, slowly at first, then with added speed. The Shaggy Man pulled the sail way up, and they flew so fast over the deadly desert that everyone held fast to the sides of the boat and scarcely dared to breathe. The sand lay in billows, and was in the places very uneven, so that the boat rocked dangerously from side to side, but it never quite tipped over, and the speed was so great that the Shaggy Man himself became frightened and began to wonder how he would make the ship go slower. We're spilled in the sand in the middle of the desert." We're spilled in the sand in the middle of the desert," Dorothy thought to herself.
Will be nothing but dust in a few minutes, and that will be the end of us.
Oh, if we're spilled in the sand. Okay. It's typo. Oh, Gutenberg.
But they were not spilled. And by, Polychrome, who had been clinging to the bow and looking straight ahead, saw a dark line before them and wondered what it was. It grew plainer every second, until she discovered it to be a row of jagged rocks at the end of the desert, while high above these rocks she could see a tableland of green grass and beautiful trees. "Look out!" she screamed to the Shaggy Man. "Go slowly or we'll smash into the rocks." He heard her and tried to pull down the sail, but the wind would not let go of the broad canvas, and the ropes had become tangled. Nearer and nearer they drew to the great rocks, and the Shaggy Man was in despair because he could not do anything to stop the wild rush of the sandboat. They reached the edge of the desert and bumped squarely into the rocks. There was a crash as Dorothy, Button-Bright, Toto, and Polly flew up in the air in a curve like a skyrocket's, one after another landing high up on the grass, where they rolled and tumbled for a time before they could stop themselves. The Shaggy Man flew after them, head first, and lighted in a heap beside Toto, who, being much excited at the time, seized one of the donkey's ears between his teeth and shook it and worried it as hard as he could, growling angrily. The Shaggy Man made the little dog let go and sat up to look around him. Dorothy was feeling one of her front teeth, which was loosened by the knocking against her knee as she fell. Polly was looking sorrowfully at a rent in her pretty gauze gown, and Button-Bright's fox head had stuck fast in a gopher hole, and he was wiggling his little fat legs frantically in an effort to get free. Otherwise they were unhurt by the adventure, so the Shaggy Man stood up and pulled Button-Bright out of the hole and went to the edge of the desert to look at the sandboat. It was a mere mass of splinters now, crushed out of shape against the rocks. The wind had torn away the sail and carried it to the top of a tall tree, where the fragments of it fluttered like a white flag. "Well," he said cheerily, "we're here, but where here is, I don't know." "It must be some part of the land of Oz," observed Dorothy, coming to his side. "Must it?" "Of course it must. We're across the desert, aren't we? And somewhere in the middle of Oz is the Emerald City." "To be sure," said the Shaggy Man, nodding. "Let's go there." "But I don't see any people about to show us the way," she continued. "Let's hunt for them," he suggested. "There must be people somewhere, but perhaps they did not expect us, and so are not at hand to give us a welcome." Chapter 13. The Truth Pond. Oh yeah, that's what it was. The fountain of knowledge, or whatever that I mentioned earlier. It's actually a pond of truth. Something like that. They now made a more careful examination of the country all around them. All was fresh and beautiful after the sultriness of the desert. And the sunshine was sweet, and sweet, crisp air were delightful to the wanderers. Little mounds of yellowish green were away at the right, while on the left waved a group of tall leafy trees bearing yellow blossoms that looked like tassels and pom-poms. Among the grasses carpeting the ground were pretty buttercups and cowslips and marigolds. After looking at these a moment, Dorothy said reflectively, "We must be in the country of the Winkies, for the color of that country is yellow, and you'll notice that most everything round here is yellow, that has any color at all." "But I thought this was the land of Oz," replied the Shaggy Man, as if greatly disappointed. "So it is," she declared. "But there are 4 parts to the land of Oz. The north country is purple, and it's the country of the Gillikins. The east country is blue, and that's the country of the Munchkins. Down at the south is the red country of the Quadlings, and here, in the west, the yellow country of the Winkies. This is the part that is ruled by the Tin Woodman, you know." "Who's he?" asked Button-Bright. "Why, he's the man I told you about. His name is Nick Chopper, and he has a lovely heart given to him by the wonderful wizard."
Where does he live? Asked the boy.
The wizard? Oh, he lives in the Emerald City, which is just in the middle of Oz, where the corners of the 4 countries meet.
Oh, said Button-Bright, puzzled by this explanation. We must be some distance from the Emerald City, remarked the Shaggy Man.
That's true, she replied, so we'd better start on and see if we can find any of the Winkies. They're nice people, she continued, as the little party began walking toward the group of trees. And I came here once with my friends the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman and the Cowardly Lion to fight a wicked witch who had made all the Winkies her slaves. Did you conquer her? Asked Polly. Why, I melted her with a bucket of water, and that was the end of her, replied Dorothy. After that, the people were free, you know, and they made Nick Chopper, that's the Tin Woodman, their emperor.
What's that? Asked Button-Bright.
The emperor? Oh, it's something like an alderman, I guess.
Oh, said the boy. But I thought Princess Ozma ruled Oz, said the Shaggy Man.
She does. She rules the Emerald City and all 4 countries of Oz, but each country has another little ruler, not so big as Ozma. It's like the officers of an army, you see. The little rulers and all are all captains, and Ozma's the general. By this time, they had reached the trees, which had stood in a perfect circle, and just far enough apart so that their thick branches touched, or shook hands, as Button-Bright remarked. Under the shade of the trees, they found in the center of the circle a crystal pool, its water as still as glass. It must have been deep, too, for when Polychrome bent over it, she gave a little sigh of pleasure. Why, it's a mirror, she cried, for she could see all her pretty face and fluffy rainbow-tinted gown reflected in the pool, as natural as life. Dorothy bent over too, and began to arrange her hair, blown by the desert wind into scraggling tangles. Button-Bright leaned over the edge next, and then began to cry, for the sight of the fox had frightened the poor little fellow.
I guess I won't look, remarked the Shaggy Man sadly,
for he didn't like his donkey head either. While Polly and Dorothy tried to comfort Button-Bright, the Shaggy Man sat down near the edge of the pool, where his image could not be reflected, and stared at the water thoughtfully. As he did, he noticed a silver plate fastened to a rock just under the surface of the water, and on the silver plate was engraved these words: The Truth Pond. Ah! He cried, the Shaggy Man, springing to his feet with eager joy. We found it at last! Found what? Asked Dorothy, running to him. The Truth Pond. Now at last I may get rid of this frightful head, for we were told, you'd remember, that only the Truth Pond could restore me to my proper face. Me too, shouted Button-Bright, trotting up to them. Of course, said Dorothy. It'll cure you both of your bad heads, I guess. Isn't it lucky we found it?
It is indeed, replied the Shaggy Man. I hated dreadfully to go to Princess Ozma looking like this, and she's to have a birthday celebration too. Just then a splash startled them, for Button-Bright, in his anxiety to see the pool that would cure him, had stepped too near the edge and tumbled heels over head into the water. Down he went, out of sight entirely, so that only his sailor hat floated to the top of the Truth Pond. He soon bobbed up, and the Shaggy Man seized him by his sailor collar and dragged him to the shore, dripping and gasping for breath. They all looked upon the boy wonderingly, for the fox head with his sharp nose and pointed ears were gone, and in its place appeared the chubby round face and blue eyes of the pretty curls that had belonged to Button-Bright before King Dox of Foxville transformed him. Oh, what a darling! Cried Polly, and would have hugged the little one had he not been so wet. Their joyful exclamations made the child rub the water out of his eyes and look at his friends questioningly. You're all right now, dear, said Dorothy. Come and look at yourself. She led him to the pool, and although there were still a few ripples on the surface of the water, you could see his reflection plainly. It's me, he said, in a pleased yet awed whisper. Of course it is,
replied the girl. "And we're all as glad as you are, Button-Bright."
"Well," announced the Shaggy Man, "it's my turn next."
He took off his shaggy coat and laid it on the grass and dived headfirst into the truth pond. When he came up, the donkey's head had disappeared, and the Shaggy Man's own shaggy head was in its place, with the water dripping in a little streams from his shaggy whiskers. He scrambled ashore and shook himself to get off some of the wet, and then leaned over the pool to look admiringly at his reflected face.
"I may not be strictly beautiful even now," he said to his companions, who watched him with smiling faces, "but I'm so much handsomer than any donkey that I feel as proud as I can be."
"You're all right, Shaggy Man," declared Dorothy, "and Button-Bright is all right too. So let's thank the Truth Pond for being so nice and start on our journey to the Emerald City."
"I hate to leave it," murmured the Shaggy Man with a sigh. "A truth pond wouldn't be a bad thing to carry around with us."
But he put on his coat and started with the others in search of someone to direct them on their way. Thank you so much for listening to this reading. This was a condensed version of my live streams on Twitch. I stream Tuesdays through Thursdays and on Sundays from 9 PM CST to 1 AM CST. So join me on twitch.tv/the_Captain_Nemo if you want the full versions where I interact with chat between chapters. If you want to hear more, there are plenty of videos on my channel that will hopefully comfort you and help you relax. If you enjoyed this video, or if I've helped you relax in any way, please consider liking this video and subscribing. There will be more to come. Leave a comment down below and tell me what book you would like to hear me read, if it's in public domain, of course.